I'm so excited for today. This is the conversation I was telling Sarajane before we went live. This is a conversation that I can't believe I get to be a part of. Like I get to sit in and learn about this subject because I have been such an avid follower of Sarajane's for so long. I've been so intrigued by the Enneagram. I've been so intrigued by personality type and its influence on business. And so I know today we're going to have such a powerful conversation. Nadia, welcome from Los Angeles. So happy that you're here. Welcome, welcome, welcome. All right, friends, I'm going to kick us off and get us rocking and rolling. And we are just so thrilled and so excited. My name is Natalie Franke. I'm the head of community at HoneyBook and the co-founder of the Rising Tide Society. And to start us off, I want to welcome you to this awesome Global Tuesdays Together. For those of you who are new or who might not know, Rising Tide is a community of small business owners, independent freelancers, service providers, creative entrepreneurs who unite in the spirit of community over competition. We are a community of hundreds of local chapters led by extraordinary volunteer leaders, co-leaders, and chairs, some of whom I spotted in the chat. Welcome. We have a Facebook community with over 70,000 community members that is facilitated by an incredible team of online moderators. And we offer educational resources that are released almost daily, including things like blog posts, webinars, templates, monthly downloadable guides, and so much more, completely free to you, our community, to help you grow a thriving business. Because we believe here at Rising Tide that an empowered creative economy will change the world. By elevating the voices of independent small business owners, sharing their stories, and building a thriving community, we can support you in your pursuit of a sustainable livelihood. As a lot of y'all know, last year when the pandemic shut down our in-person meetings, we decided to take things online, and with an overwhelmingly positive response, we've continued to do it over and over again and provide this Global Tuesdays Together content every single month. Now, today we are talking about a unique topic, but one, again, that I prefaced, I am so excited for us to dive into: the idea that you are your best business asset, how to own your superpower. We're going to be talking about understanding yourself as an entrepreneur and what it means as there continues to be a powerful shift to centering you as a superpower in your business. You are your brand, your service, your business's biggest asset, and how you navigate knowing yourself in an empowering and healthy way can transform the trajectory of your business. So to lead us through that conversation, to guide us into helping to know ourselves better and understanding the importance of it, is the one and only Sarajane Case. Sarajane Case is the author of The Honest Enneagram, host of the Enneagram and Coffee podcast, and creator of the Brave Collective. She works with the Enneagram to help individuals find a creative balance between productivity and self-care, so they can feel confident in where they spend their time. Sarajane, thank you so much for joining us. We are so excited to have you.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
I can't wait to dive into this conversation. Before we even touch on Enneagram or talk about Enneagram, I'd first be curious to know, because you do so much work in the personality space and just like knowing yourself, what does it mean to really know yourself and understand yourself as an entrepreneur? Let's begin there. Like, what does it mean to know yourself? Why is it important? Why are we here today? Like, what's the key reason for this important side of entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I think it's this magical mix of really owning our strengths, but also being confident and comfortable with our blind spots and like the areas that aren't working for us, and kind of having almost a neutral, factual understanding of who we are. I think so often we're taught like, love yourself, like speak affirmations over yourself. And I think that's incredible and beautiful, but I don't know about you, but like if I've been there so many times where I've been like, I am strong, I am confident. And it's like, I don't even believe the words that are coming out of my mouth, because there's almost this disconnect between the level of confidence we're supposed to have in being a business owner and like where we feel like we are. But if we look at it like data, like, okay, I have some strengths, I have some weaknesses, this is just math, then you can like let your strengths shine, create support plans for those weaknesses, and then you can feel like you're integrating the difference, right? And you're like, okay, here's what it is. Here's what I'm working with. I had someone talk to me one time at a conference a long time ago, and I was kind of sussing out this thing of like, why is it important that we know what we need to work on? Like, why is that matter when we're pairing it with love, light, and all the good things. That feels more fun. Like, yes, I'm wonderful and confident, but it's like, you can't feel truly deeply connectedly confident without looking at the stuff under the bed, without like getting under there and really getting into it. It's like a monster in the closet situation. That's kind of what that's what the person at the conference was like. Yeah, it's like you have a monster in the closet and you're like, it's so scary. I'm just going to keep the closet door closed. I'm not going to look at it. And so it just kind of stays there, making you feel worse and scared and uncomfortable, impacting everything that you're doing because you're running from the monster. But then when you open the closet, it's just a broom. It's just like, oh, it's a broom that's terrifying me. And that's how it is with most of our blind spots or our weaknesses. It's like, oh, it's just kind of like everybody else. We're all working with good and bad and all in between. And when we can really own that and put that together, we're empowered to actually make strategic decisions with how we spend our time and who we hire and how we structure our business.
Oh, I'm so excited to dive into so many of the touch points you just referenced, especially the hiring. I heard you say hiring and I'm like, oh, and prior to this, when we were offline, we were talking about like, oh, on the team, we've got someone who's a 2 and an 8 and a 3. And it just, for those, before you even start throwing out numbers, let's rewind a second and say, okay, so a lot of us, can I just hear in the chat, have you heard of the Enneagram? For folks tuning in today, are you familiar with the Enneagram? Drop in a yes. Awesome. Tabitha, yes. Nadia, yes. Kate, yes. Great. Yes. Okay, good. Just been diving into it recently. Fantastic. A lot of yeses. Fantastic. My next question for folks in the chat, before I turn it over to Jane with the question, is, do you know your number? So for those of you who are tuning in today, if you feel comfortable sharing your Enneagram number, can you drop that in the chat? And if you don't know, that's too, yeah, Kim, that's totally fine too. Awesome. Okay, here we go. So some 4s, 2s, 7s, 6.5. I love the wing here. 8, 3. Yeah. Very diverse crowd, which is awesome and very much common in entrepreneurship. So let's kind of jump into the question. First of all, what is the Enneagram? Why do you like it? Like, what is it about it that you think is different from, let's say, some of the other personality type testing, the Myers-Briggs or whatever it is? Like, well, what is it? And what do you like about it?
Mm-hmm. So the Enneagram is essentially 9 distinct personality types. It's broken down by like motivation, core fear, the things that are driving our behavior. I like to think of it as like, it tells you who you thought you had to be your whole life. So like some of us thought our whole life we had to be successful, or we had to be happy, or we had to be easy to get along with. So it informed all of our behavior from that perspective. And I love a lot of the personality tools. I would say like Myers-Briggs, there's a lot of overlap. The thing I like about the Enneagram, the reason the Enneagram is like what really I latched onto, is because it is so motivation based. And so because of that, it has to be self-driven. So with the Enneagram, like if I could interact with you and I could think, oh, maybe you're a 2. But really like at the end of the day, you have to tell me because I'm not in your brain. I don't know why you do what you do. And it's so intricate and so complex that there's a lot of moving pieces. So 2 3s at different levels of health, different levels of stress with different wings, different subtypes can look very different from one another. Even though they have the same type, there's just so much depth and so much complexity. I like to say I started out as a photographer in business, and I say it's kind of like the Photoshop of personality testing because there's just always more to learn. Once you think you know it, it's like there's always more and more and more depth.
I love that. And I love that you talked about motivation because I think this is something that, we like in our Global Tuesdays Together last month, we talked about networking and relationships. And we talked specifically about introverts and extroverts. And there was an ambiverts. And there was a lot of conversation in that realm of like, basically where you get energy from. But a lot of that can be determined. Like you could meet someone and go, oh, I think they're introverted. Or you could walk into a room and say like, oh, that person is definitely an extrovert. Like there's no way. And sometimes you're wrong. Sometimes you're off. Some people are introverts, but lean ambivert and then can express with a lot of outgoing attitude. But a lot of times you can pick up on it. With Enneagram, I think you're onto something in terms of like what makes it so unique is that it's deep. It goes deep. It digs into kind of our motivating factors, which can both propel us forward, or if we're leaning into an unhealthy, can be things that hold us back or that keep us, in the same patterns of struggle and weaknesses. And so with that, I do have a question, because part of this is like, okay, by the way, side note, for everyone who doesn't know your type, is there a place you recommend us encouraging them to go check out to find out their type before we go into more of the depth?
Yeah, honestly, I think the best way and the simplest way to type yourself is to read a description of each of the types. And my favorite descriptions are on EnneagramInstitute.com.
Okay.
If you do want a quiz, I will type it in the chat also, but CPENneagram.com has a really good test. So that might be a really good place for you to start.
Cool. Okay, good. So for folks who don't know, encourage after this, read the descriptions, take the test. Highly recommend. It definitely has helped me personally, like just to unpack, more of my own personality. And some of y'all know what I am. So if you do, you can probably figure it out. But what I will say is, as we're getting to know ourselves, as we're starting to dig into whether it's Enneagram, whether it's just spending time with yourself, spending quality time and really reflecting on who you are, taking something like Myers-Briggs, doing the work of uncovering you and who you are. Should we, in that pursuit, just focus on spending time in our strengths and knowing what we're good at and leaning into our strengths? Or is it also productive to spend time understanding our weaknesses? You alluded to a little bit of this in kind of the intro, but I'd be curious to know, like, what is the right and healthy balance for an entrepreneur as they look forward? Because again, knowing the strengths or, being aware of the weaknesses, it impacts not just how you run the business, but if you're hiring, how you're hiring, or, if you're serving clients, where you're showing up and spending your time. So is it that we should just focus on strengths? Should we also pay attention to weaknesses? Is there a healthy balance there? What do you recommend?
Well, I have like a pre-answer and then another answer. So the pre-answer kind of bounces off of something you touched on a minute ago, which is essentially that our greatest strengths in our Enneagram type, when overused, are also the things that are holding us back. So it's kind of like twos are really loving and really giving. And then when overused, when used for the wrong reasons, they're giving beyond their capacity. They're giving with expectation to receive something in return. They're giving what they're hoping to receive from others. And so it's finding like, where are these strengths? Where's the healthy, happy place for them in my life? So that's kind of my pre-answer. But then I think there's actually, like, how I teach it is to look at and honor your strengths first, because we want to create a safe place to land when we go into the harder parts of our personality. Most of us, 90% of people that are doing this work, who are in these spaces, they're having a harder time with honoring their strengths. That's actually the part where they're struggling, feeling like, well, what if I actually am not as good as I think I am? What if I'm a failure? What if there's something wrong with me? Or be having really harsh inner critics, depending on your Enneagram type, putting other people before yourself. That tends to be more and more the norm in the circles that I am typically in online. And I am imagining in Rising Tide Society, you're drawing people in who are more humble than they are dealing with their ego. I mean, yeah. So that being said, start with the safe space. Start with creating a relationship to yourself where you feel worthy, you feel good enough, and just start honoring those strengths. So use the Enneagram to tell you, here's where you're contributing positively to the lives of others. Here's why we need you. Here's why your voice matters. And then from there, you have this safe place where you can start to work on the harder things and really look at, where am I falling short? Where do I continuously, repeatedly drop the ball? What do I find to be very difficult and I tend to struggle with? And remember that your type isn't the bad one. There's no wrong type. Every single Enneagram type has things in which they are incredible at and things that aren't working. And it's usually some relationship. They're related to each other typically. So own that. And then you can start to put plans in place and strategies in place to just compensate for it.
I love that. I also want to highlight what you just said. There is no bad type, period. There is unhealthy and healthy within any of the types. And I can attest to being on both sides of that spectrum within my own type in my own lifetime, which is why,
like, day for me.
Yes. Oh, even within a day, Oh, yes. Even within the same day, I can experience like the depths of my insecurities and my fears leaning me into an unhealthy direction, which is why we need to be, aware. So I say, oh no, Nat, that's not true. Right. Or, oh, I gotta, besides the 3, I worry, what do other people think? Oh my gosh, like, how does it look from the outside? And that can hold me back from actually just doing the work that matters. And so, and I know there's some 3s in here. I saw you and you might know what I'm talking about. All of us are going to have those things. So I love what you said. I just want to highlight that again, as you guys continue to explore this. There's no good type and bad type, and we need all the types. This is another key point, in community. And we see this on teams. We see this in life, in families, in friend groups. Having a group that has a lot of different types brings more to the table. We need all of you. We need everybody. So it's important to know there's no bad type. There's healthy and unhealthy within each type. And there's so much value in getting to know yourself. And I would even say one thing, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too, like folks that you either have on your team and work closely with, like knowing what their type is. It's similar to, I know everyone has talked in the past in relationships about love languages, but I kind of connected to that because once I knew on my team, hey, this person is an 8, this person is a 2, I can also start to reflect my own behavior and how I communicate with them. Am I, expressing gratitude enough for the way this person goes above and beyond as a 2, Wendy, and is always serving other people, always loving on our leaders, always giving out, Wendy, sorry, I had to call you on that. Or am I not? Because as a 3, am I more focused on like the external output and I'm not giving correct, right? So as we know ourselves and we know our teams, see, Brittany's seeing it. Wendy is such a like amazing, phenomenal too. When you know that and you start to know the other types beyond your own type and you grow in that, you can also learn how to show up for people. And I love that. And so I'd be curious. And I know I'm going out of order here. We had some questions that came in, so I apologize. I hope I don't miss anyone's questions that came in, but I do want to know like any advice for that, like either uncovering folks in your life and what numbers they are, how to like love on the people in your life who are a certain number or type. And just like, how does that guide us as entrepreneurs, as leaders, but also as partners, as friends, in both personal and professional?
Yeah. So, we all have these unique ways of giving and receiving feedback. And I think that can be really helpful in the workplace, especially, but also in any intimate relationship when you're having to give constructive feedback or, kind of you're growing together and trying to learn together. And I think a lot of times we're giving what we hope to receive. So, without having, without going through all the types for you guys, I can kind of say, like, think about 8s. 8s are very blunt. They're very direct. They're straightforward. And in return, if you keep your feedback to them to the point, short and direct, that actually creates a space of safety and efficiency for them that they respond well to. 8s are, another fun thing, I'll kind of touch on this as well, is when we're interacting, especially in an intimate relationship, we are kind of interacting with 2 types, because when we think about the Enneagram, we think about your dominant type. There's a line that you go to when you are at rest, when you are at ease, when you feel safe. And there's a theory called the soul child theory, which I personally believe in, which is that number that you go to when you're at rest is actually who you were as a child, and your dominant type has grown to protect that type. So, for example, an 8 as a little kid would be a 2, kind of the warmest, gushiest, most vulnerable, one of the more emotional types. And then they have built this strong iron gate around that little gushy kid inside to protect them and keep them from harm. So that being said, when you're interacting with an 8, yes, you're interacting with that tough exterior, and you're interacting with that gushy little kid inside who felt like they couldn't trust other people. And so the more honest you can be, the more safe they feel with you, because they feel like you're not going to say one thing behind their back, one thing to their face, but also look for the best in them, because they are still that gush. They are sensitive inside, as tough as they seem. So I think that that's one element. When we think about intimate relationships, remember you're interacting with not only the guarded version, we think about type 3 with like that guarded type 3 version, but we're also interacting with the scared little 6 inside. So that's for our intimate relationships. But then also in professional scenarios, when we think about feedback, you're really thinking about how are they giving feedback. 2s tend to give like Oreo feedback. Here is like, You sandwich it with the good. Here's something really wonderful about you. Here's something that's not working. Here's something great about you. And a 2 giving that to an 8 is going to seem like untrustworthy, but an 8 giving that being really direct and really blunt to a 2 is going to seem really cruel. And so you actually need to give the feedback that they're giving to you, right? Like kind of read the way that they give it, so give it back to them. This is a random kind of side thing on feedback. I just want to say this 4s, I think, are the most interesting when it comes to feedback, because you need to give them positive feedback and negative feedback completely separately. Because if you give them the positive and the negative together, they're going to hold on to the negative and release all the positive and think that you are placating them. And so they're going to just kind of assume that all of the positive was fake and that the negative was the real feedback. And so if you can give it separate, the positive will mean a lot more and it will hit more deep. And then they'll actually work on the things that aren't working as well.
Oh, I wish we had, I know, right, Nadia, like, OMG, I wish we had a 10-hour session with you, because there's so much I'm already taking away here where I'm like, oh, because my husband's an 8, I'm a 3, and I'm going, you know what? I'm not often as direct with him as I need to be. And I think he would he'll just say, tell me what you want, and I'm like, I sound like from The Notebook. I'm like, but it's not that easy. Right. But really, I mean, in all of our relationships, that was a lot. I'm going back to the yes, Tabitha, me too. And also, benefit for friends who are watching this, Sarajane has so many of these resources. And if you follow her on all the social accounts all the time, I feel like I'm learning all the time. Yeah. Thank you. Look at Wendy. Look at this Wendy, superpower, superhuman too, coming in here with all of everything we need. I love it. I love it. Okay. We did have a question that popped in while we were chatting that I want to circle back to, from Emily Lee. And Emily asks, do you feel it's appropriate to ask for a client's Enneagram number on your inquiry form? This is really interesting. I'd be curious to know what you think.
Yeah, I think that depends on the kind of relationship you want to have with your client. So, because the Enneagram is deep, it's kind of vulnerable. So if you're like, yeah, let's go there together, let's have those conversations. You want to attract clients who are like, I want to go deep with you fast, then yeah, it seems appropriate. If you want to have kind of a bit of a boundary with people, the Enneagram may not be the right place to start with them, because it's going to go deep real fast. So that's really, I think, on your personal boundary, your ideal client.
I love that answer. I think that is so true. And so many things that we do with inquiries and like just how we position it. You're right. It comes back to the person. And I also, yeah, I agree. I think it's a fantastic answer. I also think it goes back to like what your type is. Cause I know there are types that wouldn't ask. And I know there are types that like, of course I'm going to ask, like I want, and so I think it's so interesting. I think it's so interesting. And I love your answer. All right. Continuing forward with questions. As a side note, folks, as you're listening, feel free to drop questions in the chat. We got a bunch in beforehand, as y'all know, we always do. But feel free to also ask in real time if you want. Just want to encourage that. Okay. Another question that we got inbounding around boundaries, and boundaries have been a huge point of conversation lately in the entrepreneurial world. I think because especially over the last year and a half, our world has changed. And in that world changing, we're almost redefining ourselves and our boundaries. And so there's a question that inbounded around boundaries. What advice do you have for someone who is just now defining and implementing boundaries in their business to better honor their strengths? Is there something that we should be paying attention to in creating these boundaries, and then just knowing who we are and the role that plays in even setting them? Because I can tell you as a 3, I'm afraid to even set boundaries if it's gonna anyway, I'll let you take it. So I'm so curious to hear your thoughts on boundaries.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say, whoever, to this person, like, yes, yay, boundaries in your business. I think there comes a time where we realize the boundaries have to exist. Boundaries are our time creators. This is what's giving us our creative energy. It's what's giving us our time back. It's what's giving us our ability to be in life and out and in work in healthy, appropriate ways. And everybody's standard for that is going to be different. However, so when it comes to, all right, I'm looking at myself, I want to assess myself honestly, and I want to build my boundaries in my business to support me appropriately. I think look at where your pitfalls tend to be. So again, when we look at the strengths and we look at the weaknesses, they tend to be the same. So you can honor the things that bring you joy while also like realizing where that dips. So I'll use me as an example, type 7. Hello. I love making stuff. I just love to like do all the things. I want to say yes to everything. I want every opportunity. I want to create every kind of income source and every kind of, I want to do everything. That being said, that's also my greatest limitation, right? So because I want to do everything, it's my strength because I have a significant amount of energy for creation. And it's my weakness because I will often find myself with like 10 different income streams and no method to get people into the programs because I focused just on making the stuff I wanted to make. And then I didn't think about how do we get people from following me on Instagram to actually purchasing a product. So that being said, the boundary there, right, is to look at how do I create as much time as possible for the creation aspect of my business. So when I think about my assistant, her main job is to finish all my tasks. I start them, she finishes them. And that is because I know my Enneagram type, my strengths, also my weakness. So I've put her in as my support so I can like really shine where I'm great. And then I have the boundary of no new products until other products are closed. So I have like, I'm allowed 5 projects at a time, but that includes Instagram, podcast, and YouTube. So then I have 2 more projects that I'm allowed to have, which I tend to run 10, 12 more projects at a time because I'm a collector. So that being said, like knowing, yes, this creative energy is definitely my strength, giving as much time as energy to that as possible, and creating boundaries around having support for your strength, like having support for those strengths that are also your weaknesses, having boundaries around yourself and like your limitations. And then my other boundary is like, I have to have parameters around what I say yes to and what I say no to. In general, if an inquiry comes in, my assistant fields every single inquiry for me before I ever see it. And there's parameters that she like has to say no to because I am like a yes person. So that's kind of the way that I do it. So think about supporting your strengths, letting them shine, and then creating the boundaries you need and the support systems you need to support those weaknesses. And if I answered that in like a weird way, you can ask clarifying questions and it won't hurt my feelings.
No, I loved your answer to that. And I actually really loved how you related it to yourself because I felt like it was, at least for me, I'm going, okay, I can see how I have these strengths, I have these weaknesses. Yes, to setting the boundaries. One thing you talked about was your assistant. And so I want to lead this in the direction of, as we grow in our businesses, whether it's bringing on a virtual assistant, whether it's hiring a contractor for our team to manage some aspect of the business, whether it's bringing on an employee or multiple employees, do you have any recommendations there for either maybe knowing yourself and knowing what that first hire should be, or even 2, in the hiring process, kind of evaluating, who might be the right fit personality wise to kind of support maybe those areas where you are weak?
Yeah. So I think the first kind of step 1 is to really think about your motivators and what keeps you connected to your work. And I say this because for a lot of us, there's kind of shiny object syndrome around hiring. And it takes us kind of really thinking about how do I want my lifestyle to feel? I think oftentimes type 8s or type 2s are really inclined to having big teams because they like 8s love to have people, like they're really good delegators. They like having that support. They're really good at giving tasks out. But 2s are very relational. They like being around people. They like to feel supported by people. But as a 7, for me, freedom is the most important thing. I want to feel free. I don't want to feel tied down. And so if I had a team of 10, that would feel really restrictive. But so it's like, first know what's going to keep you motivated, know what you really want. Don't just do what other people have done. And then the second piece of that, when it comes to like finally time to hire, again, let's keep in mind where you need the most support. That's where really analyzing. And I like to think about like, where have I dropped the ball is kind of a strong term, but like, where do I keep struggling? Where do I keep finding myself hitting up against a wall? I had a post go live today actually about like self limitations, like how we limit ourselves. And as a 7, like I often limit myself by not completing projects, not finishing things that I start. And so I have to hire someone who's my finisher. Threes can often, if you don't mind, I'll speak to threes too. Threes can often limit themselves by not realizing how they want to feel, but instead focusing on where they want to go. And so they have to like slow down and say like, how do I actually want my business to feel on a day-to-day basis versus where do I intend to be in 5 years from now? Like, what's my life look like today? How does it feel to be me right now? And what can I do to support that? So that being said, think about where you need support, hire there first. And then when it comes to bringing Enneagram into the hiring process, I am a big fan of like not telling people you're doing that. So what I mean by that is not saying I'm looking for an Enneagram 1, but instead saying I'm looking for a detail oriented, someone with a strong sense of integrity. I'm looking for someone who wants to do the right thing, who can keep me on task, someone who's very work oriented, but is also very social justice oriented. That's what I'm looking for. That could be a 9 who's done a lot of work on themselves in their life, who has a really strong 1 wing. So we're not limiting the search to like one Enneagram type because we're more complex than that as people, but we can kind of use the Enneagram type structure as like as a blueprint for what we're looking for. And I think you can do that in your marketing as well. And who you're talking to with your ideal client, you can speak specifically to type 3s, you can speak specifically to type 5s. But that doesn't mean that everyone who hires you is going to be a 3 or a 5 or everyone you hire is going to be a specific type, but use the language. And I'm going to bounce off of that and kind of go over here for a second with the language when it comes to intimate relationships as well. I'm a big fan of use the language of the Enneagram and not the numbers. Because if I say to Natalie, you're being such a 3 right now, I'm objectifying her, essentially. I'm saying, you are this thing, I see you as this simple thing, and it's not a person, it's a number. But instead I can say, what part of you feels like you're not going to be successful if this happens? What part of you feels like you're not worthy of this thing that you're doing? That's a better question. That's a better connection than, oh, you're being a 3. That shuts down connection, whereas using the language invites connection.
Oh, that was gold. That was gold. That was so good. That was absolute gold. Yes, seriously. Wow. I love that. I absolutely love that. And I want to highlight again, we're not, even in finding out your type, it's not like you are this thing. Although all of the language often sounds like that when we're like, I'm a 3, right? We're all more complex and dynamic than that. That was a huge takeaway that I just gained from you. And also leaning into the language of what would speak to that type can help us in kind of communicating in a way that opens up room for connection and honors the dynamic nature in which all of us navigate our personalities. I'm curious to know, are there certain types that work really well with other types, or like any potential pitfalls we should be aware of or anything like that?
Yeah, I see there's like an odd amount of patterns. So when it comes to marriages, there's a significant amount of 9-3 pairings, a significant amount of 2-5 pairings. I don't know why. That's just a very common combination. Those are the two most common that I've seen over the years. And then in business, when it comes to working with other people, you can really think about the balancing act, right? So we talk, like, if we think about 3s, tend to be productivity over everything, they're like productivity focused. So like, let's get this out the door fast. And 1s tend to be very detail oriented. Let's get this done like perfect. And so that's a really good balance, right? It's like we're getting the 3 can push the 1 forward, but the 1 can make the 3 slow down and really not cut corners and make sure things are getting done to the fullest ability. And then it's the same thing. Like, think about 7. I always say, like, I'm on the hunt for my 6, because as a 7, like, 6s are follow through people. Like, they are steady, they are stable, they are secure. And that 7 energy is so like free flowing and idea oriented that we need that 6, like, whoa, have you thought this through? What does that mean for you financially? What does that mean for the next phase? How are we going to do this? And kind of slowing you down, making you ask questions. When you think about the Enneagram's kind of broken up into the 3 stances. So we have the assertive types, which are types 3, 7, and 8. We're future oriented, quick to take action, very kind of more, we're comfortable putting ourselves out there. And then we have the compliant types, which are 2, 6, and 9. They're looking for the authority and the authority. I said 2, 6, and 9. It's 6, 2, and 1. They're looking for the authority. So they're kind of saying, what's the rule here? I want to do the right thing. I'm trying to find my role in the situation. And then you're looking for then we have the withdrawing types, which are 4, 5, and 9, whereas like when conflict arises, they pull back, they go inward, and they look internally. And so I actually think like let's say you had a team of 3, a assertive type, a compliant type, and a withdrawing type would be like this perfect trifecta of like having someone who's pushing things forward, someone who's maintaining things, and someone who's willing to slow down and look back and ask where we've come, kind of how are we feeling about this? Where is this going?
Amazing. Wow. You gave an even deeper answer than I was hoping for. And that's amazing. I love that. And yet again, highlighting that like, it's not about having a team where everyone has the same strengths and the same weaknesses. It's about finding that right balance, and welcoming the differences, welcoming our differences with one another when we're building teams. And I love that. Absolutely love it. And I love Emily Lee gave you some applause. I missed it a minute ago, but you got some applause in the chat here. Okay. Continuing forward. This is a big one. Okay. Confidence as an entrepreneur, as a small business owner. Confidence is something that I think a lot of us can, regardless of personality type, in our own respective ways, struggle with. And so what can someone do who struggles with confidence around owning and celebrating their personality in their business? Because I know, whether we talk about it as confidence, or sometimes I'll hear it referred to as like imposter syndrome or comparison, it can feel really stifling. So how can we encourage more of this authenticity in business and really feeling confident in owning who you are and what your strengths are?
Yeah. And it's going to sound counterintuitive, my answer, because I think it's with going into your weaknesses, like really getting comfortable with the fact that like sometimes we're just kind of messed up. Like sometimes like I'm the worst, and being able to own that and say that is actually extremely liberating. And when we can do that, when we can really own our weaknesses and the areas that aren't working for us, well, then the strengths that's easy. It's easy to like our strengths. It's really hard to love ourselves and our weaknesses. But if we're working on unconditional love and and when I think about confidence, I think about self-love in practice, right? So like, what does love look like in a romantic relationship? Respect. It looks like being with them when they're at their worst. It means loving them even when they're difficult. It means communication. It means listening to them, asking them good questions. Like these are the things we want in a romantic relationship. Well, if we point that inward, right, we're allowed to be like, I like you even when you suck. I like you even when you're at your worst. And like, because I can be here with you. I can sit with you in your pain. I can sit with you in your suffering. I can look at you when I'm not even when you're not impressive. You're still worthy of love. And when we can give ourselves that, confidence, because like again, the strengths are easy. That like I can love my strengths all day. We might need to understand what they are and really learn them. But if we can love ourselves when things are the worst, when we're at our worst, then there's nothing to hide, right? And when it comes to imposter syndrome, it really is just about feeling like we're going to get found out. And if you just tell people, there's nothing to find. So if I'm willing to say like, yeah, I'm having a really bad week this week, or I'm having a hard time managing all the things that are on my plate right now. Well, then when someone sees that I'm having a hard time managing all the things that are on my plate right now, they're like, there's nothing that I don't already know. So there's no power that can be had over that because I'm already in deep relationship to it. That being said, owning that and then also creating a plan for it, I think is like the trifecta. Like, I think that's like the magic, because it's like, not only am I looking at this and I'm owning it, this is the data that I'm working with. Sometimes I have weaknesses, shocker. But I can also put in things in place, systems. I can automate things. I can systemize things, and I can outsource things. And I don't have to be doing every single thing that I suck at all day long. I can make it as simple as possible and then really be in my area of strength.
I want to highlight what you just said at the end there. This is really where the intersection of knowing yourself, having the self-awareness, doing the work meets thriving as an entrepreneur. I just want to highlight this for everyone. So basically what we're talking about is whether it's confidence or even success, knowing your weaknesses, loving yourself amidst your weaknesses, and then also figuring out, okay, let's put, like we talked about, boundaries, and let's put some things in place, whether they're systems, automation, whether it's a hire or an outsource, that actually enable us to be our best selves in our businesses. I love this because I think sometimes whenever we go to the conversation around outsourcing or we go to the conversation around systems and automation, it's like a one size fits all formula where I hear it all the time from the top educators in the industry going, this is how you do it my way, or like my way or the highway. This is how you find success. But what I'm hearing you say is, of course that could work for some people, like these different formulas, but first we have to know ourselves. Did anyone else, like, did you hear that hit you the way that just hit me? Like really knowing yourself, and then saying, okay, now that I know my weaknesses, now that I know, as this personality type, I need support in this way, or this is the area I'm falling short over and over and over again. And that's just perpetuating the cycle of not feeling confident. That's just perpetuating the cycle of always feeling like I have too many projects on my plate, or always feeling like I care so much about the successful outcome that I'm harming my mental well-being by not creating room for how I need to feel. And that's getting a little personal, but y'all can see where I'm going with this. Then saying, okay, how do I stop that cycle from happening? Knowing that that's part of my personality. That's the work I have to do, and setting up these systems. Do you have any advice for folks in doing that? I mean, you've already shared so much, but anything else you want to say to that can help us lean into like the tactical of like, okay, know thyself, apply learnings appropriately.
Yeah. So I think the first thing I really want to say to this is most of us are trying to discipline ourselves to being perfect. So we think if I hire the right people, like hire the right coaches, if I if I could just be self-disciplined enough, then I wouldn't have these weaknesses. And I'm saying, like, let's just pretend like that's not going anywhere, because you're probably going to be in relationship to this for the rest of your life. And no amount of like gripping on your patterns, gripping on your behavior is going to make this go away. Instead, it's just going to make this take longer, and it's going to be like taking notches into your self-esteem. Every time you feel like you're letting yourself down, every time discipline isn't good enough, it's limiting your ability to care for yourself and think you're worthy. So just to be clear, don't start with discipline. And I think you actually need to start with curiosity. What's going on here? Where do I keep showing up? What are the patterns in my behavior? What are the patterns in my business? What feedback do I continuously receive from my clients that like good feedback and negative feedback? Where do, surveying clients who didn't hire you, asking them why, just asking a lot more questions from yourself and from others, and then looking at the data, looking at it as like, this is the information, this is what's not working. And then practically saying, is this, like, first of all, where am I at in my business? Can I pay someone to do this? If you can afford to pay someone else to do it, I think just do that. Start there. That's where I would prefer everybody start. But obviously that's not where we're all at in business. So then say, is there a system that I can put in place that makes this easier for me? If that's, using HoneyBook and saying like, okay, I'm going to put a workflow in. They didn't ask me to pitch HoneyBook, but that's one of mine. Is I have like workflows for these things so I don't lose track of stuff. Or is that like scheduling in self-care days? Is that scheduling in morning check-ins with twos? Like, this is simple, but with twos, I say, like, sit down with yourself every day and go, what do I need? Heart, mind, body, and soul, because you don't know. Like, most twos don't know. You're usually giving what you're hoping to receive. And so pausing and just taking the time, that can be a system for your business that helps you to get more in tune with what the day needs to hold. And then on a more practical level, on a more business strategy level, and then ask yourself, can I automate this? Where can I, is there a software for this? Is there another way to do this that would take it off of my plate completely?
I love that. Ooh, the curiosity over discipline, asking good questions, leaning into that. I love that. And I also love the suggestion of for twos, by the way, side note for all my twos listening, that was a really good one. Steal that one, take that one with you as you go. We got another question from registration I want to make sure that I cover here. And this leans into social media. So this, and I almost want to expand this question beyond social, but I do think it's relevant to everyone who's in this room, which is, at what frequency do you think sharing you is most successful? Meaning, like, how much do we lean in to really sharing about ourselves, about who we are, these personality type aspects, the strengths, like bearing our soul on the interwebs? Like, how much do you suggest doing of that? Any advice that you have there?
Yeah. I mean, I think first, know why you're doing it. First and foremost. So if you're sharing of yourself, know why you're doing that. I think the internet is such a new phenomenon that we learned personal branding at the beginning, and we all jumped on board. And then the authenticity movement happened, and we're like, okay, personal brand is only about the highlights. So now we need like radical authenticity. And then we're starting to realize, whoa, maybe some things are just for me. And like, maybe this is crossing my boundary, and maybe it makes some sense for me to not just share like every terrible feeling I have. And so honestly, it's like, what are your boundaries? What are your limitations? I think about, when I look at it as the Enneagram, we have our type 5s who are the most private of all of the Enneagram types, like more private in person, not just online. And then we have like people type 7s who we tend to be like very all out there. 4s are very like emotionally available. But know your boundaries, and then ask yourself why. And remember, you can always give more. You can't take things back. And this is like, I'm extremely vulnerable online. Like, I share everything, but that for me is something that I feel extremely comfortable with. I've come to over time. I've been doing this for a really long time. I have some comfort, and I still have boundaries. Like, I still have things that I'm like, that's for me. A good rule of thumb that I use in my life is like, speak from the closed wound, not the open wound. So if it's happening right now, don't do that. If it's happening later, once it's closed, it's healed over, then we can talk about it. But really, you have to trust yourself and trust your boundaries. And you can brand on the fact that you like coffee, or you can brand on the fact that like you are going through a grief of losing a parent. Not that that needs to be your brand, but that can be your authenticity. When it comes to imposter syndrome, I think it's liberating to just say it out. I honestly do. I think the more that our private and our public selves are in alignment, the less we feel like an imposter in our lives. And I'll say, like, I'll say right here with you guys, like, I'm going through, or I have been going through like a very deep grief. And honestly, sharing that online is actually sane making for me, because otherwise I feel like I'm going onto the internet and I'm like, hi, everybody, welcome to the day. Here's the internet. Here I am performing. And then I go home and I grieve. But instead I have I say, like, I'm going through a grief process. I'm showing up a little bit less online right now. And I'm not crying on my podcast saying this or revealing the intimate details, but that's my boundary. But when, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's kind of like, how close can I get my private to my public life without it crossing my personal boundary?
Ooh, and I think sometimes when we don't have alignment, I think sometimes when we are sort of, maybe showing up one way, but feeling another behind the screen, that also creates not just fuel to the fire of imposter syndrome, but it can leave us feeling like really uncomfortable and really not the good kind of discomfort that we talk about here all the time. We're like, lean into discomfort, the kind of discomfort where we're right. We do sort of feel like a fraud. And I talk about this a little bit in my book, and I've shared this openly, but even, hiding a personal diagnosis for many, many years, a health diagnosis, like, at the time, I thought I was helping myself, but I felt like such a fraud showing up. I felt like such a fraud, showing up like everything was great and going on wonderfully, when in reality, my life looked very different. When behind the scenes, it was certain doctor's appointments and concerns over the future. And, just not having that alignment really actually caused me more harm than a boundary that would have been protective, than a boundary that actually would have allowed me to have what I needed. And so I think sometimes too, that discernment as we go through things in our lives of just saying like, hey, this is a boundary and I'm more healed and protected by enacting this, or what I thought was a boundary maybe it's actually putting me out of alignment. Like maybe that's actually leading me to feel that feeling of imposter syndrome. So much gold in that, and so much wisdom that can be taken away. I know we're like, oh, I want to make sure we keep us to time. We did have some questions that popped in. I'm going to ask real quick if we could do it like rapid fire style to make sure we get you out of here and everyone out of here within an hour. But Tabitha asked about introverts and extroverts. So I'm going to scroll back up, Tabitha, to find the exact question here. If it's related, hold tight. Oh, I can't find it. Okay. Basically asking if being an introvert or an extrovert is related to the Enneagram in any way.
Yeah, so it depends on who you ask. Some people will say certain types are definitely introverted or extroverted. And then other schools of thought will say no. So yeah, it just depends on who you ask. I personally think you can be introverted or extroverted. I think of introversion and extroversion as a spectrum. So I think that you can kind of be on that spectrum no matter what your type is.
I'm actually with you on that. It is absolutely a spectrum, 110%. At least I believe, again, that's what I believe, but I think it's 100% a spectrum, because I've met folks that are like, I test introvert, but I'm like, but I think you're in the middle somewhere. I think you're like, if it's out of 100, you're like a 49 on the, right? Okay. Yes. Hear you 100%. I love it. Okay. Another question Emily asked here: as a 2, I found that I'm terrified of negative feedback. So I've stopped asking for testimonials. Any advice?
Yeah, so that like it breaks my heart. Because I think positive feedback is so important to 2s. Hearing what you're doing well is so important. So it's kind of like you're limiting your access to the good feedback by limiting your access to the negative feedback. And so I think one thing is like when you kind of close the door to the bad, you're also closing the door to the good. And you might not realize how good you are at your job because you're not getting the feedback that you need. But then on the second level, really thinking of it as data. One thing that I've done when I've been particularly sensitive is I'll have my assistant field my feedback for me and just put it in a spreadsheet as data. So it's not attached to people's names. It's not attached to how I think they're experiencing me personally. It's just like, the interface isn't working for this reason, or people can't find this button. I'm not reading like, how dare you not put the button in a more obvious place? Instead, I'm reading, the button's not in a more obvious place. So if you have the ability to, if you have an assistant who can field that, then great. If not, really kind of suss out what they're really trying to tell you. And one of my favorite practices, if you haven't read the book, The 4 Agreements, is it's never about you. It's never about you. Their negative feedback, their emotionality around the negative feedback is really about something that happened to them at another time. And it's coming at you. Like their response to a button on your website is actually not that big. This is about something else. So you can kind of separate out, just, it's not personal.
I love that. I love removing because we often, all of us will say, oh, we take it personally in different ways, depending on who we are. But I think removing that is really important for every type, as a side note, because then we can really dig into the data and actually if there are changes that need to be made, we can make the changes without then spending 2 weeks worrying about that one comment.
Yeah.
Okay. Cause I've been there and it's not fun and nobody wants to, and we know our brains are risk averse. So if you present, and I love what you said about 4s, but I think this applies to a lot of brains. If you, hear 3 bits of positive feedback and 1 negative comment, friends, what do we remember? What do we remember? What's the one thing we remember? The negative comment. And we can get 1,000 positive comments, but you get one person that didn't like what you did, what service you offered, the book you wrote, the course you launched, and you're going to remember that over everything else. And so I love this idea too of sort of, when we can, giving feedback in very data kind of structured ways that removes the emotionality from it, removes some of that ability to take it personally. Oh my goodness. All right, Sarajane, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for being a part of this conversation. For folks who are listening that want to dig in, want to learn more, want to connect with you on a deeper level, I know we've got some links here, but feel free to tell us where we can do that.
Yeah. So yeah, we have Instagram, which is Sarajane Case. And then I have a podcast, Enneagram and Coffee. I podcast 5 days a week. And I have a YouTube channel now, which is Sarajane Case as well, where we do more like vlog style things and lifestyle stuff. So I would love to hang out with any of you there. And if you joined here, let me know, because I want to like go creep on your pages.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And also, Wendy, everyone, can we give Sarajane a huge round of applause? Wendy Zook behind the scenes here, making everything happen. Thank you both. And thank you everyone who showed up live and is watching the replay. We are so excited that you're a part of this community, and we can't wait to see you again next month for Global Tuesdays Together. Take care, everybody. And thank you so much.